Recording.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming to the EPC for this in-person event co-organized by the Balkan Civil Society Development Network and the TEN network together with the EPC titled How Do We Get to an Enlargement That Delivered? As you might have seen in the agenda, the event will be composed by two panels. The first one discussing the role of civil society and the EU in defending democracy in the Western Balkans, and the second one on how the growth plan can incentivize transformative reforms in the region. Before we start with the first panel discussion, we are delighted to count with Valentina Superti, the Director for the Western Balkans at DG ENEST, until now known as DG NEAR, in the European Commission, who will deliver an opening keynote. Dear Mrs. Superti, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Is this the good thing to do, to push the right button? It's a good start. So good afternoon to all of you, honorable members of the European Parliament, representatives from the civil society organizations, organizers, and all of you. So I'm particularly pleased to be and happy to be with you here today, albeit for a short time. But I thought it's actually very important for the European Commission and DG ENEST, indeed, Enlargement Eastern Neighborhood, to be present here today. And why? Because since now a couple of years, crucially after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, enlargement process has gained a new momentum, as we always say. But at the same time, we are saying and we are convinced that enlargement is an historic opportunity, both for joining countries, so the countries inspiring to join the European Union, but also for the current member states and for the European Union as a whole. Let's think one moment rationally that enlargement does bring socioeconomic, political, and security advantages, those of a bigger union. By the way, we are all witnessing the previous enlargement and its effects. At the same time, with this new momentum, it's important to underline and understand that the enlargement process continues to be a merit-based process, which means that it depends, so the pace of accession depends on the objective progress made by each of the countries. And this is easier to say than to do. because it requires determination from the countries concerned to implement irreversible reforms in all areas, especially of the rule of law, European rule of law, with a special emphasis on the so-called fundamentals in the enlargement process. So what is this rule of law notion? It's a very important thing because it's about democracy, fundamental values, the European values, which will continue to be the cornerstone of our EU enlargement policy. And as you may know, it's not just words, but the new Commission, the new European Commission, and President von der Leyen herself, with this second mandate, has tasked every single member of her college. So this is the mission letters of each commissioner, asking each member of the European Commission to play an active role in supporting candidate countries. And this is the first time that this is happening since decades. So this is very important because it's a political signal, but it also means that the candidate countries can count on the expertise. The Commission is a technical institution very much, so countries can count on our technical expertise, but also our dedication across Commission services. So this in itself, I think it shows that there is a will, certainly in the European Commission, to make tangible progress on enlargement. This is also witnessed by, indeed, the new DG, Ernest. Well, this is enlargement Eastern neighborhood, but what is behind the creation of this DG? It's the idea that enlargement per se is a big political priority, because unlike in the previous institutional cycle, the DG mandate will be enlargement focused. So which again, it's a strong political signal. And the commissioner costs. So as you know, we have now a new commissioner for enlargement. It's a Slovenian Commissioner Marta Kos. She's urging all, and this is very important, all 10 enlargement countries to demonstrate unity and inclusivity throughout the process. And what do I mean with this? I mean that accession negotiations actually are not only a business between Brussels and and the institutions alone, but it is a collective effort of the entire society, and this is very important for us. So what's the point here? It's that to enlarge, it's not only aligning chapters and legislation, which of course is very important and has to be done. It's not only the reforms, but it's eventually about having everyone of the country concerned to be potentially on board. So this is the parliament, of course, it's the government, of course, but then it's the opposition, of course, and then it's the civil society organizations. But beyond that, it is potentially, hopefully, every region, town, and village, and ultimately every single citizen. So you see, the endeavor is quite challenging. And so I come to your role. Many of you, I understand, are coming from and are representing today civil society. And let me be very clear on this one now with you. I'm the director responsible for the Western Balkans 6. Civil society is for us an indispensable actor of a participatory democracy and societal development. So actually, any democracy needs to be based on a strong and vibrant civil society, with the objective, of course, not to disrupt, but to co-create, to be, to develop a positive agenda. The positive agenda is helping, strengthening decision-making, and ensuring that economic, social, and political reforms are well anchored in society. So we come back to the societal angle, very important angle of this of the enlargement policy. And let me say again, the European Commission is adamant on the importance of a close and productive relationship with civil society actors. This is also witnessed or testified by a very recent initiative. You have seen that the European Commission has recently adopted and published its very important yearly document, which is the 2025 work program. And in this work program, the Commission has announced the forthcoming civil society strategy, so which is precisely called the EU strategy to support, protect, and empower civil society. Again, I think this is a clear sign. At the same time, there is also a cross-generational element. So I refer here to the importance of also having younger, certainly than me, younger people, on board in this process. And we are also working for trying at least to have as many young voices represented also in the enlargement process. As you know, we have established youth policy dialogues, and the objective is precisely to empower young voices and ensure their and your, I see many young faces here, meaningful participation in shaping the future of Europe. The future of Europe is yours, is of the younger generations, is less for my generation. Commissioner Kos held the first dialogue with young generations in early February in Nova Gorica. This is a very, 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 very nice and inspiring story. So Nova Gorica in Slovenia and Gorizia, Italia. Participants contributed to the debate in that context. Now, when it comes specifically to the support that the European Commission is giving to civil society organizations, let me say here that it's not only political will, it's not only words, but it's also concrete technical and financial assistance that we are providing in line with the guidelines for EU support to civil society in the enlargement region. And again, our ambition, the EU ambition, is to ensure a conducive environment for civil society organizations to operate independently, but also that civil society organizations fruitfully cooperate with public institutions. And thirdly, that civil society organizations have the capacity and the resilience to operate with adequate expertise. So we have this beautiful financial instrument, let me say, which is the instrument for pre-accession assistance. So this is called in jargon IPA 3. For the period 21-25, we have been supporting civil society and media for an amount of over 350 million euros, 350 million euros that are channeled through the civil society facility and the media program. So let me say, because I think on your menu today, there is also the growth plan. So this is a new important instrument, objective boosting. I say always two things here. First of all, boosting the socio-economic development of the countries. That is the objective. Second one is to prepare for membership. It's not a substitute, it's a tool to prepare for membership in order to allow a softer landing at the end of the road when the countries will join, and I'm sure they will join the European Union. As you know, we have now been working on reform agendas. With unfortunately 5, not 6, but still we have 5 reform agendas done with the countries. It's an instrument that is similar to the Recovery and Resilience Facility for member states. So it's a result-based instrument. So it's about incentivizing the right reforms for socioeconomic development in the region. And here we need you. That is my message. We need you. We need, in particular, civil society help in monitoring the implementation of these reform, especially that the time horizon for carrying out the reforms is relatively short. So we are talking here about a period that goes from this year. Now we are starting 25, 26, and 27. There may be a grace period of 1 or 2 years, but still it's relatively short, and it's in the text of the regulation. So it's a legal, there is a legal hook in the regulation that says that civil society needs to be involved into the implementation and monitoring of key reforms. With that in mind, we have started by using more efficiently, hopefully, more what are already existing for end initiative. And I give you an example. We are closely working with the organizer of the Civil Society Forum, organized by the Berlin process yearly, and also in several thematic groups led by civil society organizations active in environment, gender, transport, rule of law. And we are also yearly organizing an EU civil society forum with civil society organizations active in the Western Balkans, and also benefiting from EU support. And more recently, we kicked off a EU-funded project led by the European Policy Institute, you are here today, that will help us monitor the progress of the growth plan, and particularly the reform agendas I was referring to just now. And of course, governments will have to do their part in involving as much as possible also the citizens in the enlargement process. So this is my let's say pitch, for you today on what we are doing with regard to have enlargement in as much as possible full of a society exercise. I actually quote here a commissioner, so I am quoting my own commissioner who says, here in my notes I've said, but actually it's not that she said, that she continuously says all the time that enlargement, so EU accession process, is a collective effort from the entire society. Government alone cannot achieve this goal. Let me say, so of course, for us, it's important to deal with governments because that is the natural counterpart for our discussions, but we need to go beyond that. With those things in mind and considerations in mind, I thank you very much for your kind attention. I wish you a very constructive, as always, but also useful discussion, I'm sure. I apologize in anticipation. I will have to leave in 10 minutes. My colleagues will stay here the whole time, and I think we'll see each other briefly also later on this evening. And again, thank you very much for the opportunity to have that you gave me to say these introductory words. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and it will be a pleasure to have you for even if it's just for 10 minutes. Thank you for your for coming here and for your introductory words. Very insightful. I think that they will be a very good starting point to kick off our conversation. Thank you for reiterating the Commission's commitment to support EU aspirants in their efforts to meet the EU criteria, especially when it comes to the fundamental, and especially thank you for highlighting the role of different stakeholders, including civil society, in the entire reform process. And having said that, I will now introduce you to the speakers in order to start our first conversation. So from my right to the left, Taulan Hoxha. He is the Executive Director of the Kosovar Civil Society Foundation and Chair of the Board of the Balkan Civil Society Development Network. Gordan Bozanac, he's a member of the European Parliament of the Greens and EFA Group. Nikola Burazer, he's the Executive Editor of the European Western Balkans, and Biljana Spasovska, Executive Director of the Balkan Civil Society Development Network. Apologize in advance if I mispronunciate any of your names. Thank you for being here today with us. We have very limited time because then after that we have another very interesting discussion on the growth plan. So I will first give the floor to each of you for your first intervention. I will ask you to be brief, so then we might have some time for a Q&A with the audience, that I'm sure that they will be very interested in asking you questions. I will kick off the discussion by asking Mr. Bozanac, as a member of the European Parliament, what do you think that EU institutions can do to support civil society, the efforts of civil society in the Western Balkans to defend democratic values, and how can the EU support civil society as well? The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me, especially today when it's a very important day to talk about the civil society in Western Balkans, because I guess most of you know what happened this morning in Serbia. And the new wave of repression towards civil society organizations by Vučić regime. So it's more than accurate to talk what can European Union done, or what has been European Union doing wrong, that we are today at the point when we are witnessing what we are witnessing today, unfortunately, in Serbia. But going back to your question, I would just like shortly to introduce my background. I'm really coming from the civil society. For more than 20 years, I was working with mostly with one Center for Peace Studies in Croatia, which is still an active organization. But I would like to recall the days when Croatia was joining European Union, and when us, not only my organization, but other civil society organizations from Croatia, has been actively working on the enlargement process. And now when I'm MEP, actually, I have to say that I'm quite surprised how things has rapidly changed, because I see totally different dynamic in relationship between civil society, commission, council, government, than it was then in 2013. Just to give you one brief example, at that time we organized the civil society platform. It was called 112 as this emergency number, symbolically. And I do remember regular meetings with the European Commission in Brussels and Zagreb, when actually we together were creating the benchmarks. So it was a different methodology back then. But I remember the grande finale of Croatia, when there was like still 10 points to be satisfied by Croatia to become a full member. 5 out of those 10 points were brought on the table by the civil society, adopted by the Commission, and put in the front of Croatian government. One of them was just, to give more justice to the Serbian national minority and their properties. The second one was, there was this incredible, ridiculous law on golf, because Croatian government wanted to build a lot of golf courts, damaging the environment. So we asked to cancel that, one of the conditions to join Croatia EU, to cancel this law. And it was adopted by the Commission. And go back to today's reality. Can you imagine that NGOs from Serbia comes and sit with the Commission and puts like some concrete proposals in front of the Commission, and then Commission puts it in front of Vučić. It's unimaginable. Of course, let's face reality. The world has changed. It's a totally different dynamic. I mean, in the context of 2013, when Croatia was the only candidate at that point, it was in everybody's interest to join, in European Union interest, Croatia, etc. Today, you know, this political power relations has been changed, as we know, especially we don't know what will happen now with this change in the United States. But this idea that you know, that there is also the need for the fast track approach and fast track adoption of the Western Balkans countries because of the Russian influence, and that the doors are very wide open, so that maybe we can even reduce the criteria. It is important political reality, and I don't want to dismiss, you know, to neglect that. But just I think that the fundamental question is now how to find the balance. Yes, I'm also with my full heart to speed up the process, even maybe not to insist so much on some criteria, but then again, it doesn't mean not to exist to any criteria at all. And when I'm saying not to exist to any criteria at all, I will recall now again this epic press conference with von der Leyen and Vučić on presentation of the growth plan, which took place in October. That was really, really wrong. And I'm repeating that wherever I can, because I also know that this was not done by mistake. It's not that there was lack of information. It's not that, you know, the intelligence was not there. Everything was there. And this kind of really, I would now call it like school book, textbook press conference took place, and unfortunately went in one totally wrong direction, which today we are witnessing that it was really deeply wrong what was said at that press conference. Who hasn't seen that press conference, please look at it, because it's really, as I said, something which will maybe be studied in the textbooks. So, but I still think, you know, that we can continue, that we should keep on working, especially nowadays when my impression is what is happening with this new partnership between USA and Russia, that actually we are witnessing the new division of the world, which is not only driven by the interests, of course it is, by geographical interests, geopolitical, by raw minerals, etc. But it's also value driven. And this is which is maybe still not understand. So the fact that Trump administration and people around Trump are value-based, more closer now to Putin than to von der Leyen or, I don't know, Merz or Plenković. This is something which is different. And when you put in the basket those values division, then you will also see that Vučić is now very close to Putin and to Trump, those kind of values. We will also see Orban, who is very close on this value. And maybe, who knows, maybe it's at this point unimaginable, but maybe yes, maybe we will see in the next 6, 7, 8 months, year, that United States will become autocratic state, and that will also reshape and rechange the Europe and the global relations. In that context, it's now more than ever important, really, to, you know, be beside the civil society, who is traditionally the vocal voice of, you know, rule of law, human rights, of the values which I truly believe we still stand for, and that majority of the people, at least in Europe, still stands for. Although the results of the national elections from country to country sometimes are quite depressing. So in that sense, it is really important to keep on working, keep on going, and to try to give as much as possible support to civil society organizations. I'm really hoping that from the parliament perspective, I think that we did quite the maximum that we could do at this point. It was the silence, what was about, you know, the situation in Serbia and the Balkans was really terrifying. And I'm glad that actually the parliament broke that silence. But now we are expecting the Commission and the Council also to be more vocal about that. And, you know, that really brings and puts civil society as a key partners in a forthcoming period, if we want to defend values, or maybe we will give up. That's also a legitimate way of doing the politics, but then, you know, the world will be, and the Europe will be much different than it's today.
Thank you. Thank you also for being so brief and to the point. And I mean, you've mentioned the situation in Serbia. I think it's very relevant that we are having this discussion today in light of what's happening. I think that later Biljana and Nicola are gonna delve into that. But first, I'm gonna give the floor to Mr. Hoxha. If you can also explain how is it seen, how do you see it from your perspective, the support that you receive from the EU, whether you think that it's the adequate one, whether there is something else that the EU could do to support and help civil society that are working for the democratic transformation of the Balkans.
Thank you very much, Berta. Dear Director Superti, Mr. Bosanas, panelists, participants. It's a pleasure to be here today and bring the perspective of the Balkan civil society in these very important times, which are very challenging, and I would say also existential for democracy in some of the countries. And the events of this morning in Belgrade only confirm this. In line of the geopolitical changes, the changing world that you were mentioning, I think that we from the Balkans very much understand how Brussels and EU capitals might feel these days, because we have been quite in a long relationship with someone who is more powerful than us, but decides unexpectedly to change the rules of the game. And while you are waiting for their next action, you feel like kind of with no agency. For a long time, EU was seen as a transformative force in our region, and it really played a crucial role. Most of the positive developments that have happened in our region, in each of the countries, for a very long time, have been either inspired or directly supported from the EU at different levels. But more and more in the recent years, the EU is seen as incapable of delivering on its promises, rather very innovative in finding excuses and conditions after conditions after conditions in a pathway that actually leads nowhere, while most of the time neglecting democracy as one of the basic conditions. The series of unkept promises to North Macedonia and still ongoing, the silence for the protests in Serbia, the very unjust and unprincipled measures against Kosovo, while at the same time appeasing Serbia, are just some of the very notable examples that made us very difficult for us as civil society actors on the ground to really continue and use EU as a reference of standards, values, and principles in our daily fight for democracy and accountable government. With the recent changes in the last couple of days, it's a very realistic scenario that EU could remain probably the only global powerful actor that is still committed to the democracy, rule of law, and protection of human rights, unfortunately. So there is this option of retreating and consolidating only within its borders, and kind of a giving up on the Balkans and the rest of Europe, who is not a member. Or is the other alternative of expanding in its influence in the rest of the continent, because it is the actor of the continent. And I think that this should be, especially with Trump's return to the White House, is a final wake-up call for Europe that it needs to unite, and unite because we believe, at least, that only united it can survive the upcoming storms for democracy. And by united, we don't mean only united in EU, but united as a continent. And for this, I think EU should recognize definitely that we need a credible enlargement process in order to have any influence on our societies. Without a credible enlargement process, more and more EU is losing its leverage in becoming an ally to the democratic forces in the region. In saying this, we are very aware that even in the best case scenario, the state accession will take years. It's not something that would really move that fast. But what we believe can happen immediately is a integration of civil society, like in a common civic space. If there are discussions about fast tracking into single market, about joint security arrangements within the EU, there is no excuse of not applying the same principles to civil society, because it's very clear that unlike states, this requires less bureaucracy. It's very easier done if there is a political will. And by this we mean a meaningful involvement of civil society from across Europe, not only the Western Balkans, in all EU discussions, platforms, processes, programs as equal partner of this European civic space. We have examples of this. There is a very plausible initiative from the Economic and Social Committee that started just 2 years ago. It was an initiative of the president of the committee to extend the non-voting membership also to the social partners and civil society from the other countries of the region, but which was directly damaged with a bureaucratic trick. Kosovo's civil society and social partners were excluded due to the formally lacking of the candidate status. Although we all know how the candidate status were granted in December 23 to most of the countries, and the real relevance to this status to the work of the committee. And our request as a network, but also as Kosovo civil society, to be included is lost somewhere in this bureaucracy for more than a year now. So we have this great example of a political will to extend this common civic space, but at the same time we have an example of mistakes that we should avoid in dealing with this bureaucracy that doesn't serve to the purpose. Civil society strategy, which is published in the work program now, is the other very immediate venue that we can apply the same principle. And we are not talking here just about fairness and symbolism. We believe that as a civil society and citizens from the region, we have great experience and expertise in defending democracy in difficult times. We have been facing autocratic regimes for much longer than you in the EU, and our lived experience is an added value to the table in these very difficult times where democratic values are under attack from within and outside of the EU. So on behalf of civil society of the Balkans, including the network, I want everyone here to leave with a message from our side. So we really need a quick European common civic space today because of mutual interest, not for our benefit, only because the fight for democracy doesn't start when a country gets into the EU. Actually, it starts way before it, and we've been fighting this fight in our countries for a long time. More and more civil society is fighting the fight also inside the EU. So either we get together in this fight, or we risk to lose it all. And I think that everyone here has a role to play in not ending in the losing side. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, indeed, I would say that in general, democracy is not just challenging the Western Balkans, but also within the EU, we are experiencing democratic backsliding in several EU member states. I will now move to Mrs. Pasowska. You recently published a piece explaining the challenges that civil society, the civic space in the Western Balkans are facing. Maybe you can tell us some of the conclusions and also what are the implications of the shrinking of the civic space for the region's EU path?
Thank you so much. And actually, I want to thank you first to the hosts for enabling this discussion here, and to all the speakers and to everyone actually for joining us in this very important and very timely discussion, because it will shape the future of our region's democratic and economic trajectory. As we speak, institutions in Serbia have been instrumentalized for open repression against civil society organizations. At this very moment, fully armed police officers have been railing the offices of 5 prominent civil society organizations in Serbia, including BCSDN member civic initiatives. The pretense is the USAID funds and money laundering, citing suspicious raised by the highest US officials. So it's about suspicious. This follows a pattern of escalating intimidation against activists, journalists, and independent organizations, including invasive financial investigations, smear campaigns, and legislative proposals at restricting civic engagement. This repression has been further fueled by the Trump new rhetoric attacking civil society, emboldening far-right and nationalist groups across the Western Balkans to escalate their efforts to smear civil society organizations and activists who especially work on anti-corruption, human rights, and democratic accountability. The impact of these attacks extends beyond Serbia. At the same time, the students protesting in Serbia have been mobilized an unprecedented coalition of social groups demanding respect for fundamental rights and end to a systematic corruption, issues at the heart of a democratic transition. None of their demands have been met, and authorities have responded with spinning the campaigns, with spinning smear campaigns, basically, and spin strategies to discredit the movement. Their refusal to negotiate is not a rejection of dialogue, but rather a statement that democratic fundamentals cannot be bargained. In Republika Srpska, President Milorad Dodik has directly cited Trump's action against foreign-funded NGOs as justification for introducing one of the most restrictive civil society laws today. He announced that a rigorous law on NGOs will be passed at the first session of Republika Srpska National Assembly, specifically targeting organizations he accuses of using foreign funds to smear Republika Srpska or the Serbian people. This new legislation, he promised, would be stricter than previous ones, the previous version, which was blocked by the Constitutional Court at the time. In Turkey, a similar and further assault on independent voices is unfolding. The recent withdrawal, but very likely to be reintroduced, Article 339A of the Turkish Penal Code, would have criminalized civil society organizations and business leaders and business associations and leaders under the guise of national security. Even TUSAID, Turkey's most influential business association, has been targeted for merely advocating for democracy and the rule of law, and its leaders were subjected to criminal investigations and judicial restrictions after calling for better governance and economic stability. So this crackdown demonstrates that no independent voices, no matter how powerful they are, outside the government, whether it is civil society, media, or businesses, is safe when the space for dissent is systematically dismantled. These attacks on civic space are not isolated incidents. They're part of a global trend, as we already have spoken of democratic backsliding, fueled by nationalistic narratives that frame civil society as a threat rather than essential pillar of democracy. So for years, the accession process, which has been in limbo, its ability to generate change has been undermined. But now suddenly, as we see renewed momentum, the question has to be put, what momentum towards what? So let me as well be very clear on where we stand. We really do want renewed momentum for the EU accession, but one that strengthens our democracies and delivers meaningful reform. The current acceleration is largely driven by geopolitical realities concerning over security, energy, and strategic positioning era of global instability. But the real competitive advantage of the EU is not just its market size or economic leverage, it is commitment to democratic governance, to social economy, and to human rights. And these are not burdens, but rather they are what makes the EU strong and distinct in a world of nowadays competing power blocks. So if the Western Balkans is truly integrated, then an accelerated accession process must reinforce, but not bypass, the democratic foundations that make EU and EU membership desirable in the first place. So if accession is to be a real opportunity for transformation, then it must include clear, enforceable mechanisms that protect civic space and ensure the inclusion of all citizens, especially marginalized community who are most vulnerable to democratic backsliding. So this means, and I can come here if what maybe the European Parliament can do even further. So maybe a resolution on ensuring the civic space protections are systematically embedded in the EU accession process without being misused to stall negotiations again. While the civic space would be a structural component of the rule of law, ensuring that citizens remain engaged in democratic processes at all levels. We hope the Commission would establish a binding framework for democratic safeguards and accountability, which will include clear, measurable indicators, assessing the openness on civic space, independence of institutions, and the ability of citizens to participate. And where civic space is restricted, the EU would ensure alternative channels for civic actors to continue their work through political backing, diplomatic engagement, and protection mechanism. Structured responses also have to be incorporated to civic space violations as currently are happening and adequately responded. That responds to targeted, proportionate, and aligned with long-term democratic stability. So civil society actors in this case as well should be formally integrated and reflected in the EU monitoring frameworks. And I'm glad Ms. Superti announced the involvement of the civil society in the monitoring of the growth plan. But we have to go beyond and we have to be very clear on this. So it is not about replacing our government assessments, but about ensuring that civic space and civic voices, particularly those which are most marginalized and are at the forefront of democracy accountability, have a seat at the table. So instead of further delaying enlargement, we should see a structured step-by-step integration process that ensures civic space protections while allowing the region to advance towards membership. This is not about choosing between democratic standards and progress. It's about ensuring that both go hand in hand, and we would really like to see that. So our call to action for the EU would be to allow candidate countries to accelerate towards membership without I want to come to that a bit later at this point. But our call and our pledge is that if EU does not act decisively on this, we're not risking only the enabling, we're not only risking and enabling further democratic sliding, but also weakening EU's own influence in a world where others are very eager to step up and to offer alternative models and values. So in a sense, we're in a region where civil society is under attack, where independent institutions are eroded, and where dissident is stifled, this region would be a democratic transformation will become impossible, instability would rise, and the European model will be undermined in favor of competitive systems. And this is what we see as a scenario if this trend continues further. However, if civic space protections are institutionalized within the EU enlargement framework, we can turn the tide against backsliding and build a Europe that is not just strategically stronger, but democratically stronger as well. So the EU's real competitive advantage, we see its commitment to democracy as it has been, social inclusion and human rights, even though this is a changing world we are currently experienced. So we do want renowned momentum, we do want a fast track accession, but one that leads to a democratic, inclusive, and truly European future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will now give you the floor, Nicola. If you want to delve a little bit more into the current situation of civil society in Serbia, and then of course if you want to touch upon the general situation of civil society in the Western Balkans as well, feel free to do so.
Well, thank you, Berta. Well, us from Serbia are frequently accused of being too Serbia-centric, claiming that our problems are the greatest, and being too dramatic by saying that things have really become much worse than they were. But this time around, the other interlocutors here basically said this before me, so it's not so hard to convince you that the situation is indeed dramatic, and the biggest problems in the region are, in fact, in Serbia. If you are not aware, but Biljana already talked about this before, 5 Serbian CSOs were stormed by the police today with accusations of possible money laundering, basically based on the statements by US officials. So not even by an investigation which is going on in the United States, but based on statements by US officials, even though there are no such investigations against recipients of USAID funds, not even in the United States. So basically, this was an excuse. The government of Serbia basically did this with an excuse of investigating USAID basically related misuse of funds, but essentially it comes down to silencing critics who are in the civil society, because all the organizations who were attacked by this particular, let's say, campaign they are critical of the Serbian government. And this is just a combination of a campaign against the civil society in Serbia, which goes on for years, but has culminated in recent months with the anti-government protests. So just to name a few things which we faced, first of all, our constant smear campaigns, where we are all smeared and labeled as traitors and foreign mercenaries, and working against not only the government, but against the state itself, trying to destroy Serbia as such. This is said basically on a daily basis by government officials and by pro-government media. So only living in this environment is already problematic. But besides that, we had surveillance of civil society activists by the police and secret services, and there evidence of this basically found by the Amnesty International report that there are several civil society activists, including people I know that personally close to me, who were infected with advanced spyware. So the government basically monitored the work of the civil society through these mechanisms as well, on several occasions. There were also financial investigations in the past against individuals who were too vocal against the government, and now basically this is just one step further in this campaign. Basically, the civil society is an important actor, but primarily because of the experience and the expertise that exists in the civil society, but also because we can provide critical voices. We can help improve the reform processes with our critical voices. This is why we are necessary and needed in this process. But the problem is that precisely because of this role we play, we are under attack by the government, and we are faced with basically such smear campaigns. And now, well, basically you can say no longer only smear campaigns, but actually and investigations that are pretty much jeopardizing our work. Of course, I want to be too Serbia-centric now by saying that, this is all only happening in Serbia. We have similar problems in other Western Balkan countries. I would say the problems may be different, but there are definitely severe limitations to how the civil society is integrated into the EU accession process, how much it is actually respected as a partner in the dialogue, and how much it is ignored by the government. But definitely in Serbia, we do have this unprecedented basically campaign against the civil society, which pretty much brings into question the very existence of the civil society. And the overall atmosphere in the world, as you know, is not really let's say, positive for us who work in the civil society. We all know what's happening in the United States, and it's a big question: how will the EU adapt to the new circumstances? Will the EU be able to support civil society organizations and our work as it has done before? We can only hope it does. But definitely this shows that even EU's leverage sometimes is not strong enough to prevent these things from happening, or perhaps it is. This is what I'll come down to a bit later. I actually wanted to mention here briefly the question of media freedom, because it's hard to talk about civil society without mentioning media, because the problems are pretty similar, I would say. Democracy is not only relevant for the accession process in terms of being present in the enlargement negotiations, but it is also fundamentally important for democracy in candidate countries. And in that sense, it needs to be much more in the focus of EU enlargement than it was up to this point. And there are several problems that I can say that are there in every single, or let's say most Western Balkan countries, beginning with the question of state financing, the question of capture of media regulators, the question of capture of public broadcasters, and the overall problem with funding of independent media. And this is going to be, I would say, an increasingly big challenge in the future with current events happening in the United States. Of course, the EU is claiming that it does focus on media freedom, that it does care about media freedom, but there definitely more can be done to put media freedom in the focus of the EU accession process. First of all, the EU is not really insisting on this question enough. It is there somewhere, in the chapter 23, and occasionally also mentioned on these parts of the report on democracy. But there is no pressure when it comes to media freedom, the way, for example, there was pressure on Serbia in the past regarding sanctions on Russia. Every single EU official who came to Belgrade spoke about sanctions on Russia as the most important, basically, thing that Serbia should do to open new clusters. But nobody has done the same for media freedom, and we know that media freedom in Serbia for a number of years now is perhaps the burning issue. Of course, Serbia is not the only country who faces these problems. Other countries have pretty similar problems, I would say, and according to some of these, let's say, independent assessments of media freedom in the Western Balkans, Serbia is not even ranked as the worst. So this is definitely a problem that needs to be addressed better. I just like to offer some, let's say, short answer to the main question: what can the EU do to improve democracy? But related to what we were talking about before. Well, first of all, EU's assessment, if you look at the European Commission reports, is not good enough in the sense that it doesn't basically recognize backsliding. It only focuses on progress. It only basically shows limited or maybe a bit bigger progress in some countries, but it really shies away from assessing anything as backsliding. And if you look at any other international reports concerning democracy, rule of law, media freedom, you will see that some of these countries, Serbia especially, are backsliding significantly the past 10 years, while at the same time, Serbia made progress in EU accession reforms. The second is, of course, is clear communication, because as was mentioned here before, Ursula von der Leyen, when she came to Belgrade back in October, she praised the Serbian government for its reforms, especially in the rule of law. And not even the Commission reports themselves basically say the same story, let alone other reports which I previously mentioned. So there is a parallel reality there presented by the European Commission President, basically, which is not really true. And this presents a problem because it basically encourages the government to continue doing the same. It presents to the citizens of Serbia that the EU is satisfied with the progress made so far. And with this, there is a problem with rewarding superficial reforms. So the EU is sometimes willing to focus on some very superficial reforms which are not even implemented properly as basically a reason to support some processes and to claim a government has done its job, even though it is not really the case because the reforms themselves weren't implemented. And even if they were, they wouldn't be basically resolving all the problems that we're talking about here. So I understand the need for the European Union, especially the Commission, to somehow push enlargement forward, to remain on friendly terms with the government in the Western Balkans, to basically show that there is something, moving forward. But this is not how it is done, because at least when it comes to Serbia, we're talking about a government which doesn't really want to reform. We're talking about a government which tries to capture the state further. And if this continues like this, it will be a question: how is it possible that a country becomes authoritarian, becomes Belarus, in the middle of the EU accession process, where the EU said things are fine, reforms are doing fine? So this is a very important question that we need to talk about. What happened today in Serbia is only the beginning. I'm quite certain there will be a continuation of this campaign and of other issues which we have talked about here, but also some others. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. We are very, very late, so I will now open the floor for questions from the audience directly. I see already some hands there. If Tabea can pass the mic, I will please ask you to be really brief and stick to questions, so we will have time to gather as many as possible. And please, I would I would ask you to introduce yourself before putting your question.
Hello, everyone. Mirko Popović, Renewables and Environmental Regulatory Institute, Republic of Serbia. So first of all, thank to all of you for mentioning this terrifying situation happened today in Serbia, but I just want to highlight it is not something that anyone should be surprised. And the civil society from Serbia sent signals and tried to convince, particularly executive institutions on the European level, what's happened in Serbia. Unfortunately, we have the statement or position that is the best described by the statement of the President of Commission, that President Vučić expressed his commitment to the rule of law by his deeds. Yes, he did, and everyone can see it today. So what I want to call all of you, to the extent of your competence, not to express empathy or solidarity with civil society in Serbia, but to act to the extent of your capacities and competence to provide support and to prevent extension of this situation, because I'm afraid that it will not be only the case in Serbia that such things will happen, and I am afraid that it will lead to destabilization of the region. I just want to ask you to comment on two proposals actually, and I think that Biljana present very good recommendations, but I want to express some. First of all, particularly from the point of view from civil society from Serbia, and particularly to the European Commission, please and please don't call us into the dialogue with Serbian government. It is not possible. We try to share with you relevant information why it is not possible. My organization is dealing in the issues of environment and energy transition, and we tried for years to share with you evidence why it is not possible to have a dialogue with the government of Serbia. So please don't push and don't look for solutions how we can maintain that. It is not possible. Give new strength to new actors, such as parliamentarians, because we don't have, at the moment in Serbia, we don't have parliament. Because in few next day, instead of voting about the resigning of the prime minister, Serbian parliament will adopt several laws. It might be the adoption of Expo law, which will dismiss several laws which were adopted in November, and then we'll discuss about the resignment of the prime minister. So this is how the parliament is. So new space for parliamentarians and European Parliament in monitoring of processes, a new space for civil society, not through the dialogue. Ms. Superti mentioned Berlin process. I must say that I participate for years in Berlin process. Berlin process is very important, but the methodology of Berlin process is just the way how we should not do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And please, if you can keep your interventions slightly a bit more brief, so we only have 5 minutes to answer them. We can pass the mic then, and then to the window. Can you give him the mic? The one behind. Yeah, David.
I'll be very brave because I know this is almost ending. My name is Nina Vujanovic. I investigate topics of Western Balkans in Bruegel Institute. Thank you. This was all very interesting. I'm just curious about what was the role of civil society in Belgrade protests that were very influential in the whole region. They spilled onto other countries, like let's say Montenegro. So I'm just curious about this linkage, whether there was cohesion, was it helpful or not, considering the political context of Serbia?
Thank you. And we can now to David, yeah. And we will have to cut it here. Then we are going to move to the panel, and then you will have the chance to ask more questions in the second panel at the end of it.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to see familiar faces in the panel and in the audience. Well, it's difficult not to mention the situation in Serbia. My colleague Anna is following the situation from the European Economic and Social Committee. I'm David Hojić, policy officer for Western Balkans there. You know, there is this EU-Serbia Civil Society Joint Consultative Committee that is trying to do its work, and our president and the committee have issued very strong statements recently. I think another statement is being prepared. But I wanted to come to the initiative that Taulant mentioned, the enlargement candidate members initiative, with which our European Economic and Social Committee tries to be the first body to actually implement the gradual accession of candidate countries to the EU by including representatives of civil society to our work. I checked with our colleagues the call for the open call for the Kosovo civil society representatives is ready. What is now what we are waiting now is the European Commission to actually approve the financial support to our initiative, because without this support we cannot continue in this year and in the years to come. Otherwise, everything is ready for Kosovo to be included, for the initiative to continue. And we thank very much Biljana and the Balkan Civil Society Development Network, with more than 100 organizations from the whole region that gave their support, and we hope that the Commission will act soon. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And I don't know who wants to take the floor to answer the second question. Do you know? Okay, Nicola, go ahead. Yeah.
One was directed to me. So basically civil society has no role to play in this particular protest if we're talking about student protests, because student protests are autochthonous. They're not in any way connected to any other actor. They're completely, I would say, grassroots in that sense. And they're not attacking civil society because civil society has a role to play in the protests, but because they actually want to prevent the civil society from having any cooperation with the students and with other actors, so that there will be a unified front against the government. They actually find it easy, the government, to make a distance, a wedge between students and anybody else. So they would somehow try to appease the students and, well, arrest or prosecute everybody else. And this is what they're doing, because on the one hand, they're doing what they're doing to the opposition and the civil society. And on the other hand, they're now started openly praising the students for their independence and them being smart for not accepting any suggestions by the political parties or anyone else. So this is the situation currently.
Thank you so much. If anyone else wants to have some final, yeah, okay, Tauland, very brief.
Yeah. First, finally, good news. Thank you, David, for using this opportunity to share it. I think it's now even more a good example of what we would expect from the rest of institutions to continue with this common civic space, as we call it for the moment. I saw some eyebrows raised when we were discussing about these issues with the European Commission the last couple of years, both in general, but also with the case of Serbia. And I would just like to bring this to the table, this balance of the progress in democracy or the backsliding of democracy with the progress of in the EU accession. Unfortunately, we have had totally the opposite. If for Serbia, European Commission and the EU in general was like searching for some positive news, we had the total opposite case with Kosovo. So whatever positive came from Kosovo, and fortunately, at least in Kosovo's case, during the last year, we were one of the very few countries that didn't really fall into this autocratic cliff. It was the opposite. There were more and more like good news in terms of democracy. The European Commission and the EU in general was trying to hide and prevent from being public. So it's very clear that we need to bring in one line the democratic progress and EU accession progress, or the backsliding and the real conditionality when it comes to this. And I think, at least from us living there, it's very visible. We really believe that also for the EU is visible, but somehow it gets lost into these very diplomatic geopolitical discussions that then at the end of the day, citizens suffer from. Thanks.
Thank you so much. And again, I'm very sorry to cut the discussion now, because I know that there were many other questions in the audience. But as I said, please stay with us for this second session that we are going to discuss the role of the growth plan in promoting this democratic transformation of the region. So I invite the speakers of the second session and Corina, who will be moderating. And please join me in thanking the panelists of this first session.
Yes. Good afternoon, and a warm welcome also from my side. It is really a shame that we had to interrupt the previous session. In the end, we tried a marathon on such a big and important question, but of course, this is a conversation that we will continue. And hopefully, if my speakers cooperate and the interventions are short, maybe the questions that weren't answered during the first round, we can pick them up again in this second and final part of our our conference, which we dedicated to the aspiring member states in the Western Balkans. It's been said also and repeated, including at the start of this conference by the Commission representative, that Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine has summoned up the geopolitical logic of EU enlargement and refocused attention on a dossier that was previously neglected. And that is all true, I would say. While much of that attention was understandably directed towards the East, particularly on Ukraine, some of it has also served the Western Balkans, where the process was clearly running out of steam. Over the past 3 years, the Union and its member states have taken a number of decisions to try to help move the region closer to the EU, not least in an attempt to foster the impression that the Eastern and the Balkan enlargement tracks were being treated and are being treated fairly. The growth plan for the Western Balkans is one of those decisions. It was taken in November 2023, as you know, and it forces 6 billion euro in support for the region's economic development and progress in the implementation of accession-related reforms. And it is on the socio-economic and political significance, but also implementation of this plan that we want to focus today in this panel discussion. As always, I'll allow my distinguished speakers to make sub-statements, and then I'll open the floor and hopefully we'll have a little bit of debate. Now, it is important to specify that the Think for Europe network, under the leadership of the European Policy Institute in North Macedonia and with the kind support of Open Society Foundation's Western Balkans, has carried out research on the process that led to the development of the agendas for the growth plan in the different countries of the region. And I very much look forward to hearing all about the results of this work from Milena Mihailovic-Denic, Program Director at the European Policy Center, Belgrade, and from Stefan Ristovski, Senior Researcher at the European Policy Institute, Skopje. They're both sitting here with me on the panel. In addition, I'm very pleased to have Valbona Zanelli, non-resident senior fellow at the European Center of the Atlantic Council, share her analysis on the convergence potential of the growth plan. But before we delve into the subject matter, I will invite Andy Dobrushi, Western Balkans Director at the Open Society Foundations, to make some brief introductory remarks. Andy, over to you.
Thank you, Corina. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for being patient and staying. I promise I'll be very, very brief. And I'm happy that OSF, Western Balkan, but OSF in general is remaining in this difficult time one of the kindest supporters. You know, like we promised to remain kind supporters of civil society for the time to come in these difficult moments. I mean, coming here, it was. I was a bit perplexed, you know, like in terms of, I mean, speaking about growth plan in this difficult moment in a context, which is, I don't know how to describe best, you know, it's like paralyzing, or is it free? I mean, it is causing this frozen sense, you know, of how to react, how to orient ourselves, you know. So these are definitely not easy time, not only for the civil societies, but for the societies in general. I think it would be remiss, you know, to limit the current confusion of only to civil society, and we're noticing the repercussions. I mean, the news that is coming from the region is not exactly encouraging. You know, what is happening, what happened today in Belgrade definitely is just one of the first signals and warning signals, actually. Like, and unfortunately, we're living in a situation where many people are taking a page from the book of idiots, you know. So and I don't think there is a shortage of that in the countries that we live, you know, but also beyond. So everyone is rushing to do that in a way that calls for a different approach, you know. And unfortunately, we also find ourselves in a kind of a catch-22, you know, also when it comes to the relationship with the European Union, you know, but and beyond. And I'm not going to talk about the growth plan per se. I think Valentina was very clear, you know, like in 2 words: boosting economic and social conditions and paving the way for the reform agenda. So preparing the country. So I'll leave that to the panel maybe to dwell further.
You did sponsor a project on this, so why did you do it?
No, I'll talk about that, you know, like very briefly, you know. But I mentioned the catch-22 because we're finding ourselves now in a kind of in this space of democratic conditionality and economic transactionalism, you know, like, and I think this is what there are elements of growth plan here as well, you know, because it engulfs both concepts, you know, like it has a very strong economic component, which we like to mention it as a very strong, you know, the money is not exactly the biggest, you know, if you look at the figures, basically it's just 0.5% of the region's gross domestic GDP, you know, annually. But still, it's a good incentive, you know, for the region to move out of this economic stagnation. And it's not only about figures and performance, but I think it's also about the need to have a governance backbone, you know. And this is where we saw basically the importance of the growth plan. And it is not only this project we have supported. We have focused very much on the agency. How can we provide more agency to the civil society organizations in the region? And I think this is where we saw the value on how the civil society is accepted to adopt rather than contribute to shaping the policy discussion. And the past years have demonstrated that, you know, if we take only the model for the staged accession, you know, it's a paper that has spurred more than, we checked actually, more than 200 civil society papers across 30 countries, you know. Maybe this doesn't prove the idea is great, you know, just to tease a bit Milena, you know, here. But it shows that when it came to the right time, it unlocked much discussion and much potential, you know, like on the approximation of the region to the EU and how it can look in practice beyond the merit-based approach that has been, you know, has been in the discussion. And it also shows that how the civil society has the capacity to dislodge these blocking stumbles, you know, like in the process. So this is what we're trying to see, you know, like also the agency. David mentioned the gradual accession model being tested through the initiative of the European Economic and Social Committee, where the enlargement candidates have engaged over 146 civil society organizations. So it is not a theoretical inclusion, I think it's a direct participation in the shared EU policy framework. So there are good signs and positive signs, which I think we should use, because momentum, as we all know, momentum is everything. So let's catch the momentum, and we should also be mindful that this growth plan should not be a substitute for the accession, basically. And we have two countries, I mean, with all their own problems, etc. But Montenegro and Albania are in the discussion. We saw basically also the statements recently from the officials of the EU, Kallas, and in the meetings, and also recently at the Munich Security Conference, in the conversations there, where, how many minutes I have? I have one more minute and I'll stop, you know, where there was a reiteration, you know, but going beyond promises, I think this is the most important thing, and this is where we enter with Ignita, with the which we saw as a continuation of the civil society forum, you know, like and we saw it as a way to shape the enlargement trajectory, and it's not keeping it only in the region with the organization in the region, but it's trying to fill the puzzle also with the Western think tanks, you know, like with the Vienna Economic Institute, with the Bruegel Institute here, with ELIAMEP, you know, to see how influential the region and how it is positioned. The region is positioned in the EU debate. So keeping the momentum alive is extremely important, and the imperative is absolutely necessary. But the time for passive waiting, and I close here, I assure you, the growth plan must deliver not just on economic indicators, and this is the topic, but on trust on institutions, in reforms, and in future where the Western Balkan is just not on the road to, but it parks within the EU itself, you know. So, I mean, on a personal note, my thesis 29 years ago was at the CEU, you know, was about Albania road, a long road towards EU integration, you know. I think it has been...
Put things into perspective.
Exactly, you know, like, so thanks a lot.
No, thank you, Andy. And at the time when, funding for civil society is becoming more and more scarce, I think it is very important that society is still investing in the region's civil society efforts to keep an eye on important instruments, new instruments such as the growth plan, but which at least in theory have a great potential. But to explore that great potential, I actually want to come first to Valbona and ask, what is your impression about this new instrument? How do you assess it? Can it really be a game changer in motivating much needed reforms and in producing some more convergence between the countries of the region and the EU when it comes to the economy?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Corina, for this question. And thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. We at the Atlantic Council in the United States in Washington, D.C. are actually one of the main think tanks that keep the Western Balkans very much in the attention also of the think tank community, of the, Congress, but also administration. And so every time that we'll talk about the growth, the Western Balkans from the previous administration to, there was always, there's the growth plan for the Western Balkans, so everything will be brighter. It's a game changer, and I think we're using this game changer word in inflationary mode. It's lost actually, its meaning. So it's a very important, and so we're coming up with a report also with the support of OSF. We're coming up, the report should be out in a couple of days about the growth plan. So we are not there to explain the details, the technical details. There are other organizations that do that, but we're looking more from a political perspective, what that brings economically in terms of convergence, also with the Western European countries. We take the example of Central and Eastern Europe, so how that has worked in the past, and then what is the conditionality, and then what could be the future. So, and very briefly, in the way of explaining that, we believe that the growth plan as a facility is important to push reforms. It's good news because it's an innovative tool of the European Commission. They came up pretty quickly on that, so that was good, and also showing coordination when it comes to the Western Balkans. It's an answer to the questions from civil society, also organizations from the region, to work more on the phasing in. So this is actually, it's a response to those calls. It aims at increasing economic convergence of the region with the Western European countries. We talk between 30 and 50% when we talk purchasing power parity, but we're talking real money, nominal US dollars. It's only 14% on average compared, the Western Balkans with the Western European countries. And of course, accelerating growth by integrating into the common market, which is very important. But let's put things into perspective. The entire market of the Western Balkans is less than 1% of the market of the European Union. So will not be very difficult to absorb it. There are the other reasons also that Andy was mentioning in making it more difficult. So a couple of points in terms of advantages, but each of those points could also be a weakness also of the growth plan. The first one is it's a good carrot incentive to push for reforms. Now, the weakness is that, is the money enough to do that? Because those were reforms that had to be implemented for the accession path of those countries. So why didn't the countries implement those reforms that were part of the agenda? Will that money be enough to push them to do this? Andy mentioned 0.5%. It's true, it's not a lot of money, but if you add it to the IPA funding, which is exactly the same amount, around 540 million for the Western Balkans, totally 6 countries every year, then will be double the money that comes, from the European Union. Now, when we talk about IPA funding, everybody mentions the 7 years, 10.6 trillion or 16 trillion, billion. But actually, it is, comprised in Turkey, and it's also a regional project. So only $4 to $5 billion in 7 years go to the Western Balkans.
But does it make a difference that only 2 of those are grants and the rest are loans?
Well, I mean, that is also true, But actually, I think you put more responsibility on the countries when it's loans than grants. I see that in a more accountable way of, measuring the impact of the money. So I don't have an issue with loans and grants because it's an issue of accountability. I think the good thing of the growth plan is that it shifts the relationship of the countries in the Western Balkans with the European Union. So it's more the partnership relationship because the growth agendas came from these countries. And it was mentioned this earlier on that this resonates or replicates the recovery fund after COVID-19. So it's based on incentives, on implementation, and then moving ahead. And then, of course, it's for geopolitical and economic reasons. And we talk also a lot in the paper regarding the increased economic influence of China in the Western Balkans and what could be the future of that. But then let me conclude with two thoughts on terms of what I see as, as challenges going ahead. The first one, the positive side is that the EU enlargement process for the Western Balkans has been a binary process, so either in or out. That will help to be a much more gradual being part of the internal market. So that's very important because I believe, coming from the region, originating from the region, is that I believe that economic security is the main security challenge in the Western Balkans. And we can delve deeper into that one. However, I see three dilemmas for the future. The first one is the security dilemma, because we all know that the enlargement process was revitalized because of Ukraine war, Russia's aggression towards Ukraine. And so I'm afraid that when the situation is more stabilized, we're going to go back to enlargement as being more a technocratic process rather than having the geopolitical security imperative that we have seen over the last 2 years. The second one is the geopolitical imperative. And we even heard yesterday Commissioner Koss saying that Ukraine will be the first country to join the European Union. Now, we know that, Ukraine is the main driver of the enlargement process, but we know that it's the most difficult country to be integrated in the European Union. So that leaves me with the question, where are the Western Balkans in this equation? And then the third one was mentioned a couple of times is the trust imperative, because the European Union accession process, it's made of hopes, it's made of fears on both sides, and it's also made of emotions. So those have been important both in enlargement fatigue and the reform fatigue in the Western Balkans. So to make it work, finally, I think there are 3 C's. The first one is credibility of the process, how credible the enlargement process will be. The second one is the consistency. Will we see maybe a second growth plan for the Western Balkans, more money going and incentivizing reforms? And the third one will be coordination among the different EU institutions on the Balkans. And I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Verbana. Lots of follow-up questions, but I want to give first the opportunity to Milena and to Stefan to come in, and then we'll go to debate with the kind requests to be very short in their first interventions. Milena, we've heard about the mixed bag that the growth plan assessment is from Verbona's research. What does your research say about how the agendas were formulated and what we can expect going forward?
Thank you, Corina. Thank you, everybody. I was asked to show a few slides just to illustrate the analysis which we have done. Just a note, Stefan will speak more about the process of adoption and analyze the process of adoption of the reform agendas, and I will focus more on their contents and what we as civil society can and what we should do in terms of monitoring the implementation going forward. Maybe it would have been more logical if Stefan spoke before me, but it doesn't matter anyway.
We can change if you want.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay.
Let's continue now. So what we've done so far, we've analyzed the 5 reform agendas which have already been adopted. You might be aware that the Bosnian and Bosnia-Herzegovina reform agenda for specific political challenges has not yet been adopted, and we hope that it will be soon. We have in the reform agendas, we have a total of 5 broad reform areas. So starting from business environment, private sector development, green and digital transition, although those can actually be separated into two separate reform areas, human capital, fundamental rights and rule of law, and public administration reform, which features only in the reform agendas of North Macedonia and Kosovo, whereas for the other countries, some public administration reform related measures are let's say, spread across other areas.
So who decided these reform areas? The countries themselves?
Well, actually, the Commission, I mean, and again, I mean, as civil society representatives, we're dealing with very limited information. But what we have been told is that basically the Commission was the one that gave the, let's say, overall plan or ideas, and then they went into negotiation. So it was very much a negotiation process, and it reiterates what Valbona spoke about, that it kind of changed the relationship between the countries and the European Commission. It was more of a negotiation and a partnership process than in some other processes. Speaking about the money, I don't know, I hope you can see the graphs, but basically on the left side, you can see the absolute values in each of the countries' reform agendas. Now, this includes also the allocation foreseen for Bosnia and Herzegovina. And on the right side, you can see the relative relationships between countries, and clearly because the methodology for distributing the funds is related to the country's sizes and the GDP. Obviously, Serbia has the largest share, followed by Albania, and so on.
So the money is not allocated on the basis of the project proposed, and the no,
it went actually in the other direction. It was reversed. So the actual allocations which we find in the reform agendas were arrived at by actually dividing the sums which were pre-allocated. The overall reform of these, the overall structure of these reform agendas start from the wide reform areas, which I showed you, then they go into sub areas, then the specific reforms and the reform steps, which are the most incremental element of the reform agendas, which basically are supposed to be measurable, quantitative and qualitative, specific actions that the governments are supposed to implement. However, I have to say that our analysis has shown that there is a lot of discrepancy in how these reform steps have been developed. We are aware that the process was really rushed because it was a new instrument, and the time frame for the adoption of these documents was extremely short. But in terms of what we are now working with, and we have developed a huge monster Excel data set with all the reform steps for all the 5 adopted reform agendas, there are very large differences between how these reform steps are defined. Some are very straightforward and simple, such as, adoption of a law. And usually those simple ones are the easiest ones, and they're the ones that are given the smallest financial allocations. But then you have very complex reform steps which assume or absorb in themselves adoption of policy documents, implementation, setting up some systems for implementation, etc. And some, or actually numerous reform steps, also are phrased as actual indicators of specific results and outcomes that need to be achieved. For example, the megawatts of renewable energy that need to be put in place. So in order to actually prepare our work for the monitoring, we had to come up with an additional, I would call it a meso level, which well, not very creatively, maybe called reform sub areas, but we tried to find what are the commonalities, what are the actual common areas that we could monitor and compare on the regional level. And I will come back to that in a couple of minutes. Just in the meantime, to show you, these are some of the examples, very few examples of the analysis which we have done. But here, for example, you can see the distribution of funding for the business environment and private sector development. And the orange line is showing how many reform steps countries need to implement in order to withdraw these amounts of money. So, for example, Serbia, in order to absorb 377 million euros for this specific area, needs to implement 26 reform steps, whereas Montenegro needs to implement 34 reform steps in order to absorb 92 million euros. So I mean, speaking from afar, it could seem unfair that some smaller countries need to actually implement many more steps and reforms. But methodologically, again, it's related to the size of the economies.
But how stand is such a comparison if in the end the agendas include items that are quite different in terms of content, and the reform steps that are required, if they substantially differ from one country to the other, can you compare across?
Yeah, well, we will not be comparing things that are not comparable. I mean, this graph was actually not a comparison. It's just showing where countries stand. In terms of comparisons, actually, I will come back to that in a couple of minutes to show the areas which we have prepared as, let's say, the obvious candidates for regional level monitoring. This is another example of an analysis which we have done, which shows how the countries have distributed reforms across the entire period. And here you can see, for example, that in this specific area, North Macedonia has more backloaded its reform agenda with a large number of steps coming in the last payment period. The payment periods are half a year, so semi-annual. And then, I mean, I think that in the interest of time, we can skip the rest. I think this presentation will be published, so it will be possible to consult it, and we will produce many more of interesting and deeper analyses based on the reform agendas in the time to come. So when it comes to the monitoring by civil society, and what we are now starting to work on through this project and with the new project that is funded by the EU, because the project funded by the Open Society Foundation's Western Balkans is sort of the preparatory work through which we have now set the stage. But the EU has awarded us the same network with a larger 3-year-long project, which will produce the detailed methodology and will provide for the monitoring of these reform agendas. The main dilemma, of course, is what do you compare? How do you compare when some of the things are so difficult to compare? So what we have done is that we have identified areas which are more comparable, where the differences are smaller. And I don't know how visible it is, but basically across each of these reform areas, we have identified specific topics, reform topics that are more common and that are more comparable between the reform agendas. So the areas which feature across all the reform agendas, for example, in the first business environment area are competition state aid, state-owned enterprises, innovation and access to finance, mainly for small and medium enterprises, and intelligent transport systems, which is mostly about integration into the EU transport system. In the green and digital, which I have to say is the most cohesive area, this is where we see the smallest differences and obviously a stronger steer from the European Commission. Not least because this is an area where there is a lot of a key, obviously. So energy efficiency, renewables in the energy transition, and in the area of digital transition, especially cyber resilience and digital public services. For us, coming from the civil society, it will be very interesting, for example, to analyze digital public services because of the impact on the wider society. Human capital area is the smallest area of the reform agendas in all the countries, not only in terms of the number of steps and reforms, but also in terms of the actual finances. And this was let's say the most difficult area to find proper comparisons because it really differs a lot. And I think that this is also expected because of the specificities of the education and the labor education systems and labor markets. And so far we have only managed to come up with VT systems and quality of education as two areas which are fairly comparable between the countries. The last area, and fundamental reform, fundamental rights and rule of law, definitely anti-corruption features as one of the most important areas. This will definitely be one of the areas that we will be following, also because of the importance of anti-corruption in the enlargement negotiations, accession negotiations. Judicial reforms are also quite prominent, and fight against organized crime. You might ask, for example, why fundamental rights are not there. Interestingly, a Macedonian reform agenda doesn't have any reform steps on fundamental rights, and this is kind of what excluded it from the regional monitoring plans. However, what is important to say is that we plan for our methodology and our project to be the inspiration also for national level monitoring, and our project will also provide sub-grants to local organizations or specialized organizations on the national level to perform country-specific analysis and monitoring for the issues that are, more specifically important and relevant for a given country. We will be trying to produce more of a regional added value. And just the last couple of words on the key issues that we actually need to tackle. First of all, we will have to ensure a lot of thematic expertise. Obviously, you can see what is the breadth of the reforms that are covered here. We have 6 researchers for the entire team, for the entire region. So we're really hoping that we will be able to generate more support and a bigger, let's say, coalition, not only of donors, but also maybe for the implementation in terms of partnerships, in order to be able to cover more holistically these reforms. Data collection and data availability. I mean, this is something that I think will prove to be one of the major issues. Stefan will now speak about the challenges we've seen in the adoption, development and adoption of the reform agendas in terms of transparency. We're kind of hoping that with implementation it will be better, but it's difficult when the process doesn't start in a very transparent way to hope that implementation will be highly transparent. We know that we will be struggle to obtain data, and this is one of the key issues that we are now thinking about and trying to solve. We will have to go beyond activities and beyond outputs, and we will have to look at the impacts and the outcomes for the society. So in order to do that, obviously, it's also going to take a little bit of time to see what are the actual impacts of these reform agendas in the society.
Yes, and sorry if my question is stupid, and maybe you're not there yet in terms of defining your methodology, but within those areas, what is it, 5 or 6 areas that you've identified? I mean, some of the issues are still quite broad, huh? Quality of education. How are you going to operationalize that in a way that is comparative across the different countries? Have you already come to agreement on it?
Not yet. Yeah. So the development of this methodology is really in the early days, but of course, I mean, we only will be comparing what is comparable. Sure. And of course, I mean, you can draw the comparisons between countries in terms of what has been prioritized, and this will also be an important aspect of our analysis to reflect on why countries and how countries have prioritized specific reforms over others. But definitely in terms of direct comparisons, we will be working and looking at the areas which are more cohesive and more comparable between the countries.
Great, thank you very much, Milena. Stefan, I'll have to be very strict with you, I'm afraid, but do share with us some of your findings regarding the process, and how did we get to the agendas, and how inclusive has the process been, and whether the instrument can reach its potential if the process is not inclusive.
Before jumping into the success with inclusion, 2 points I wanted to make. First, I think that from the very ideation phase of the growth plan, the civil society has played a vital role. Let's recall that it came after years of advocacy of the civil society that the EU has to do something if it's not ready, nor the countries are showing track record to be ready for membership of the EU. I agree with you, the geopolitical context called for the growth plan, but the Commission had place to look at to inspire itself. Debatable, obviously, on its size and scope, but it's an instrument that can serve as an example to for the EU how to design other possible instruments. I think that the first area has to remain that enlargement remains the end goal, and this is one of the instruments of the policy, rather than the primary buzz term that has to preoccupy us in the following years. The second point I wanted to point out, it's not only the reform agendas. The growth plan is a 4-pillar plan. We do have other arms of the growth plan where civil society participation has been very important. Ms. Suprete mentioned the Berlin process, which has fit in ideas for single market integration, but I think that I agree with some of the comments that the structure of how we fit in. We have noticed last year in the Berlin that we're in a silo with the Commission discussing without the government officials' presence, which is a problem of pushing pressure for the necessary reforms. And this becomes a problem because the ideas that we adopt and the speed we adopt on the single market integration to unlock the socioeconomic convergence potential of the growth plan may be limited of limited space of the civil society to influence, and fears that actually private sector influence can dictate single market integration. Because we know where the consumer surplus lies, it's usually the budget income or profits that have to be compensated. So that's why civil society participation in the growth plan more broadly, it's very important. Now going to the reform agenda adoption process, I'll be very, very brief. We are very much thankful for the USF that has not only allowed us to look at the reform growth facility more broadly, but to zoom in what the countries were doing on the ground in the preparation phase. The reform and growth facility lies down the general principle. The partnership principle is among those. So it allows for shaping, implementation, and monitoring participation in all these phases from not only civil society, but also parliaments, private sector, social partners, etc. In the very first phase, we have seen certainly a disappointing level of engagement with all branches other than the executive, and this is a general picture. We have seen some good examples of notifying the parliament or allowing more than one venue for civil society to give input. We are aware of the time constraints that stand on the way, but still the lack of access to early phases of the reform agendas was one of the main problems that we have seen. Short periods of time for commenting, ad hoc consultations, closed door discussions taking place across the region was in a way firstly problematic to generate interest and expertise to fill in. So in a way, it wasn't very inclusive to set up the agenda from the very early phase. I think what is done is done. We have to deal with what is coming up. We have the implementation monitoring phase coming, and it's good that the Commission has supported us to monitor the implementation. The project also foresees working on national consultation mechanisms where we can also influence the implementation phase within our countries, which is also a positive turn. And we are very happy that it's not only the Commission, but also other donors are interested to support this regionally or on national level. But we have to make sure that venues are open for this to happen. Doing it independently will certainly make relevance with the information provided, but also the formal places like implementation and monitoring committees is essential. I think that two main takeaways are important of why civil society has to take participation. First, to ensure that the reforms that are being implemented are sustainable. So feeding in ideas from the ones that are involved on the ground on how do we design the solutions that are related to the price tags of the reform agendas. And secondly, to ensure that this is not merely a transactional exercise where we're conducting reforms to receive money and without making progress on the wider agenda. It tackles many of the important areas for socioeconomic development, but we have to assure that this is relevant for the wider EU agenda of the region.
But if civil society was not part of the process when these reform plans and agendas were formulated, then how can you ensure at this stage that the reforms will be sustainable? I mean, there's a part of you can't. So that's already a problem. So maybe this is a lesson to keep in mind for the next time around, and also to ensure that that this is not a transactional exercise. That's all true, but I'm just wondering if you have civil society participating in the formulation of the plans and then civil society monitoring the implementation of the plans, could there be a conflict of interest there?
Oh, I think that first of all, I'm not very pessimistic as Milena. I think that influence on how things will be developed, it's possible. Analysis that is not present here is that 25% around of the reforms are related to adoption of legislation. How this acts would look like and the mechanisms behind is something that we can influence. All of the other things where implementation comes with procurement and stuff, I think that there are aspects that we have to monitor and signal if they're not being implemented following EU financial rules. I'm not certain that we can generalize when we're saying civil society set out, monitor, and implement, because it is a very heterogenic environment that we're speaking about, and it's not one single actors. I think that when we're speaking on behalf of many different organizations working in many different fields, so I don't feel like a clear cut on a conflict of interest.
Okay.
Exists.
In the interest of time, are there any questions or comments? Okay, I see two hands, and I think you've been patiently waiting from the first round, so.
You did the right choice not giving me the floor the first time, because I thought that it was Serbia-centric, the panel, but now I see that it's more balanced, even though I would love to see representatives even from Bosnia and Herzegovina and Montenegro. I work at the mission of Albania to the EU, and I'm the CEO for 5 years now of NGO that is completely 100% volunteer-based. And on a team-to-team meeting recently that we had with DGNS, I'm sorry that Director Supreti is not here anymore, we had the comment that are these reforms happening in Albania? This reform might be reversible, especially in terms of the rule of law. And I have a question directly to Mr. Andi, because he's Albanian, and I assume that he is more aware of the situation. I don't know if you are a representative for DGNS, yeah, but you can report.
How sustainable the reforms are.
You can just, it's food for thought for you, and a direct question for Mr. Andi regarding all the arrests that are happening daily in Albania, and from opposition today, from university professors, as well as even your own name being discussed by I don't know, social media or representatives of media that are questionable regarding your own wages. How can this be, like, who is monitoring the monitors? Like, how are you?
Who's guarding the guardians?
How are you distributing the financial resources towards these NGOs? Because the lady that had this concept that it might be reversible, the reforms that are happening in Albania, said that we based our opinion even in NGO reports. But these reporters can be more fond of the opposition or the opposition.
All right.
How can we be balanced?
Thank you very much. Yes, there is a question, but you've taken the floor last time. Are there any other, just to give the opportunities for more people to come in? Okay, Sonia.
Sonia Stojanovic-Gajic, this time in front of University of Rijeka. A quick question. How serious is a growth plan in comparison to alternatives? I mean, we have a customs union with Turkey, way more developed trade agreements with Eastern partners. How quickly growth plan can deliver change? And this time it's more a question, how well do you think the Commission is ready to deliver the change, quickly? So instead of tweaking small little things. For change, I'm not besting on our governments. I think if this was done properly first. Thanks.
Thank you so much. If there's no other questions, I can come to you, but please keep it to a question and not a comment. Or not a long comment.
I will have comment, but question first.
Very briefly.
Question actually should go to the European Commission. I'm wondering, because I don't know how the panelists would respond to it. So I'm wondering how we can trust that the growth plan and reform agenda will bring us closer to the European Union, having in mind the way how they are adopted. In Serbian case, it was adopted without public consultations. So, and European Commission accepted as there are strict rules in the growth plan regulation that public consultation should be performed. Now we witness at this situation in Serbia that not only consultations with civil society, but with public. But in Serbia, there was no even consultations, because the consultations with National Convention in the Assembly could not consider anyhow consultation. Give me just 1 more minute for short timeline.
No. The conversation, but thank you for the question. I will take that question, and I have to come back to the panel.
Either that I took time to fly from Belgrade.
But you consider that you got to come in twice, so hopefully this will be a little bit of consolation. Thank you so much.
Help me to get answers from Commission representatives. I believe that we have Commission representatives here.
If there are Commission representatives in the room who want to speak, then I'm happy to give them the floor. But we do have 5 minutes left, and I have 4 panelists, so I'm going to come back to the speakers, allowing them 1 minute per speaker. And if I can abuse my position, I will kindly ask you to end with one hope, recommendation that you have that is linked to the future and the potential of this instrument, the growth plan, so that we end on a positive, or in a hopeful note, if not positive. Okay, I'll start from you, Verbona.
Yeah. So maybe I'll take the first question regarding.
You can choose the questions.
Yeah, the perspective. I think the fact itself that talks about economic convergence looks at societal aspects. So I think it puts. Rather than previously that was elite oriented, I think it puts the citizen as part of the enlargement process. But then on the other side, it was mentioned the civil society was not consulted that much. Everything, I think, was a new tool, and everything was done so quickly. So it was a geopolitical response. I believe that with the growth plan too, if we're going to have one in the future, we'll see a much better process coming up. But then one critic and one sign of optimism. I think we have to be careful on the conditionality, because conditionality of the EU enlargement has not worked. And we don't know what the carrots, we know the carrots, but we don't know the sticks. And we don't know how the funding will be redistributed if the countries will not implement the necessary reforms. So I think that's a very key question on conditionality. And then on a positive note, I don't think the growth plan is important for the money that's bringing in the region, not at all. It's small, amounts. I think it will be important if it pushes the countries towards those reforms that attract serious foreign direct investment, and that will be the most positive aspect. And so here in our paper, we talk about nearshoring or Western Balkan shoring, how to attract companies in the Western Balkans, and that will be maybe the game changer, not the money that's coming as part of the growth plan.
Very good, excellent. Thank you. Andy?
Very quickly, let's not Albanize or Balkanize the discussion or make it Albanian focus. I can respond to you separately, on some of things. I just remain hopeful that the justice reform will continue, in Albania as it is, because it's very important for the credibility of many processes. The region has seen many frameworks, many frameworks that they've been well intentioned, absolutely, but some of them were done to drive progress, and some of them were done to manage expectations. I do very much hope that the growth plan will push on driving progress in the region, and I think it has all the potential to do that. So that would be my positive note on the growth plan. Thank you.
Yes, and the fact that we're trying to draw the lessons so that next time we do it better, it's already a good thing. Stefan?
Yeah, I'll shortly respond to Sonia to say, and my positive thinking or optimism is that I truly hope that our governments are ready to deliver everything that it is promised in a manner that is foreseen, because I think that it will bring positive change in such a short period of time.
Well, maybe to respond to the question from my colleague from Serbia, it is difficult to have trust in the Commission or our institutions now that the process will be very transparent and that all the conditionalities will really be applied, especially if we know that there is a huge political and geopolitical drive to actually disburse the money. So our expectation is actually that that will be our main part and our main role in the process, to insist that the conditionalities are respected and applied as much as possible. I think that, in the past, we have seen different mechanisms such as sector budget support, which was also announced as a mechanism which would be implemented with civil society monitoring and in a transparent manner, but in the end, it was done in a very opaque process. Now, the money is bigger, the stakes are higher, and I think that we will all be pushing much more strongly. Daniele here and other colleagues from the Commission know how vocal we were in the adoption process, that the letter of the regulation has to be respected, and that if consultations were included in the regulation, it should be done. In the end, very limited types of consultation, closed-door consultations were accepted in a way as a replacement for what was meant and what was written actually in the regulation. But I have to just make a small comparison. According to the information that I have and the discussions with people from the EU member states, in the resilience and recovery facility for the member states, there was absolutely no involvement of civil society organizations. So I think that now the EU will be learning from our experience, and hopefully, and this is my message for the future, I mean, I'm not saying anything new, colleagues have already said that, for the next multi-annual financial framework, we need a much bigger, I think that it needs to also be bigger, similar mechanism which will be fixed and which will actually at least try to mend some of the problems which we see and which we discover in the process of implementation of this one.
Okay, well, we've made it. It was a bit of a marathon. I think Yes, I think it was a lesson also for us as organizer that it's difficult to deal with such important topics in such short time frames. But it was an amuse-bouche, I hope. More to come. Certainly, this is a conversation to continue. Thank you very much to my panelists, and thank you for the very important work that you are doing. I look forward to seeing all of you at our future events and to take part in the conversation on these topics later on. Thank you very much and a good evening.